As we said before, nothing is safe in the theme park world, and any attraction can be retired in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, there are many creators out there who love preserving the history of these extinct attractions. Today, we asked many of these experts to join us for a trip to the past, so we can take a look at 8 retired and missed Universal attractions. This time, we'll be ranking these attractions by technology, plot, design and execution, and legacy. So, to begin, let's welcome our friends from ReviewTyme.
Battle of Galactica. The Universal Studios Hollywood Tram Tour has been changed many times since it was first opened back in 1964. From the addition of new scenes and animatronics to the upgrading of special effects. And in 1979, Universal was looking to change one of the most troublesome scenes of the tour. The rock slide was a demonstration loosely based on the film Earthquake. And whilst it was enjoyable, it never really worked properly. So it was time for a change. Universal wanted an attraction that would allow guests to be a part of it and experience it in a unique way, rather than simply just seeing it. The first concept that they thought of was to create a moment where the tram would simulate going into outer space. But this idea was quickly discarded due to the immense cost required to mimic that. During this time, Universal was working on the Battlestar Galactica television series pilot and decided that this would be the answer to their problem. They would create a scene based on the upcoming series, where a laser battle between Cylons and colonial humanoids would take place. And they would do this by using a mix of animatronics and live actors that would interact with each other. On July the 9th, 1979, Battle of Galactica opened as part of the Universal Backlot Tram Tour. The scene began when the tour was interrupted by 2 Cylons on a tank that let guests know that they were entering a war zone, and they were the prisoners of the Cylons now. The tram then entered the spaceship and went into the command center of the battle cruiser, where a Centurion presented their new prisoners to the imperious leader, who then decided they would be great snacks for their Ovion allies. Suddenly, a colonial warrior entered the scene, and the battle began. After a little while, the warrior left 3 Cylons split in half, the Ovions lit up in flames, and blasted a large door open and told the humans to escape through it. The Battle of Galactica was the first themed attraction to feature audio animatronic characters outside of a Disney park, and was the first dark ride to combine sophisticated animatronics and lasers with live performers. The scene overall was incredibly ambitious. It had 20 animatronics, which all had fundamental movements, and the most advanced animatronic of them all was the Imperial leader. So of course, it was the center of attention. Battle of Galactica was very popular among guests because of its ambitious nature and the use of groundbreaking technology for the time. But then in 1992, this part of the tram tour was gone forever, as during this time, a new building was to be built in the location of the Battle of Galactica show building. This building would eventually become home to Back to the Future, the ride, another famous retired Universal attraction.
Let's see how this attraction ranks. We give Battle of Galactica 4 out of 5 stars for groundbreaking technology, just for being the first themed attraction to feature audio animatronic characters outside a Disney park. 2 out of 5 stars for the plot, because it was exciting but didn't last long. 3 out of 5 stars for the design and execution, because the design of the whole attraction and the mix between animatronics and actors was excellent. And 1 out of 5 stars for legacy, because not many people remember or miss this attraction, which gives Battle of Galactica 10 stars out of 20. Let's move on to our next attraction, which will be presented by Defunctland.
The Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera, Universal Studios, Florida. In the battle between Disney MGM Studios and Universal Studios Florida, Universal knew that it would need attractions that appealed to people of all ages. In order to achieve this, Universal acquired the rights to the Hanna-Barbera characters so that they could be the stars of one of the 2 motion simulator rides being developed for the park. For both of these attractions, a new technology would be used. Instead of using the Atlas system used by Disney's Star Tours, Universal would instead use a large screen in an auditorium, with a dozen motion car vehicles facing the screen. The Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera was one of the first versions of the modern motion theater. The system was not as advanced as the one that Universal would use for Back to the Future the ride, but it was effective for the attraction. Originally, the animation studio Kurtz and Friends were hired to create the film's animation, but Don Bluth's production company soon took over after Kurtz was released over creative differences. The Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera opened on June 7, 1990, with Universal Studios Florida. Because it was not as complex as Jaws or Confrontation, it was one of the few reliable attractions in the park. Universal Studios Florida allowed guests to ride the movies and see how they were made. And the Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera achieved both, with Bill Hanna and Joseph Barbera showing how both hand-drawn animation and computer-generated animation were created in the ride's pre-show. In this video, Yogi Bear and Boo Boo would introduce Hanna and Barbera. The two discussed animation, showcasing how to draw Elroy Jetson, who magically came to life and jumped out of the paper. Hanna goes on to talk about computer animation using Dick Dastardly's spaceship. Dastardly and Muttley soon show up from inside the spaceship's depths, requesting that they be a part of Hanna-Barbera's next project, but they are informed that the Jetsons are the studio's next project, followed by the Flintstones and then Scooby-Doo. In a fit of rage, Dastardly kidnaps Elroy by forcefully pulling him into the computer. The computer self-destructs, and the two run away. Yogi and Boo Boo, feeling that they should do something, ask the audience to help them rescue Elroy by getting into a rocket ship. Guests boarded their ride vehicles with Yogi acting as captain. Their journey would take them through many recognizable locations. The first was Bedrock, where they saw Wilma, Betty, Fred, and Barney. Then, a vortex took them to a cemetery in the middle of the night, where they almost crashed into the Mystery Machine. They then entered a castle where they encountered Scooby, Shaggy, and some ghosts. The rocket went into another vortex and appeared in Orbit City, dodging flying cars and buildings. Elroy's family eventually appears and sees Elroy captured, and they chase after Dastardly with the riders in tow, ending in a futuristic amusement park. The riders fly on a roller coaster track and end up going down a steep drop when Rosie the robot extends her arms and lifts Dastardly and Muttley from the rocket, allowing George to save Elroy. Dastardly and Muttley then get surrounded by thousands of flying cop cars, and both are arrested and dropped in a flying jail cell. The Jetsons thank them, and the riders fly back home through a vortex and crash land back at the station on a giant inflated bumper reading End. The post-show was an interactive play area that allowed guests to play the Flintstones piano with their feet and to shrink in size to explore Pebble's Playhouse. Despite the fantastic nature of the attraction, after 12 years it had become outdated, both in terms of content and animation. A new attraction named Jimmy Neutron's Nicktoon Blast, starring the Nicktoons, including but not limited to Jimmy Neutron, would replace it. The Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera closed at Universal Studios Florida on October 20th, 2002. But this was not the end for the attraction. Like a phoenix from the ashes, the ride would find its way into regional parks throughout the world, including the Paramount Parks, Dollywood, Mall of America, and Kentucky Kingdom. However, it has since closed in all of these locations, admittedly not very Phoenix-like. The year 2002 was not great for fans of the original Universal Studios Florida. That summer, closings were announced for both the Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera and Alfred Hitchcock: The Art of Making Movies. Worse, in September, Confrontation would close for good as well.
So, we give the Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera 3 out of 5 stars for groundbreaking technology because it was the first motion theater. But Back to the Future was being developed at the same time, and it used a more advanced system. It was also one of the first times where CGI and traditional animation were mixed. 4 out of 5 stars for the plot, because it had awesome characters and fun crossover, and it had a very interesting and cool pre-show. 3 out of 5 for design and execution, because while the mix between CGI and 2D animation was terrific in the beginning, it quickly became outdated, which brought the attraction's closing. And 4 out of 5 stars for legacy, because this attraction made way for attractions like The Amazing Spider-Man, Transformers, and even Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey. That gives the Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera 14 out of 20 stars. It's time to go to our next attraction, presented by Expedition Theme Park.
E.T. Adventure. E.T. the Extraterrestrial broke the box office when it was released on June 11th, 1982. The movie was in theaters for exactly a year during its original theatrical run, with only 8 of the weekends not being top 10 finishes. So when Universal was planning their Florida park, E.T. was a no-brainer when it came to movies that would be turned to rides for the park. E.T. Adventure opened in Universal Studios Florida as an opening day attraction in 1990. The ride was of course a huge success, and it was the first ride to be first opened in Florida and then replicated in Universal Studios Hollywood in 1991. and then again also built at Universal Studios Japan 10 years later in 2001. This is an amazing ride that invited guests to get on a bike with E.T. in the basket and help him get back to his home planet. Mirroring many of the iconic images from the movie, police officers with torches and lurching cars had to be avoided, along with mysterious hazard suit figures. One of the highlights was the soaring flight above the city and across the moon. The ride went where the film didn't go though. Due to an unexplained warp in space-time, the bike ended up actually landing on the green planet where guests meet Botanicus, who urges them to save E.T.'s friends. Using E.T.'s healing touch, guests travel through the green planet, reviving E.T.'s friends and celebrating. This part of the ride is light, colourful, and beautiful. We get to see many of E.T.'s friends. In fact, the amazing Sally Corporation was the one that created almost 300 animatronic characters and spectacular out-of-this-world plants and trees for the ride, even if some of them are somewhat creepy. This ride also had a very cool personal touch that made a huge difference from the others. As you entered the queue line, each visitor told their name to a team member, and at the very end of the ride, E.T. said goodbye to every visitor by name.
He said my name.
Over the years, the attraction remained the same, but one area that did change was the pre-show. The original pre-show showed Steven Spielberg telling guests that he's making a sequel to E.T., and all the guests were going to be extras in the film. After this, the pretense was dropped, with no film equipment throughout the queue or ride, and the whole pre-show felt a little pointless. Then the pre-show was changed to one where Spielberg still appeared, introducing the attraction and gave guests the important task of helping bring E.T. back to his home, the Green Planet. This is one of Universal's most classic attractions, so it was very sad and unfortunate when Universal Studios Hollywood thought that the ride had begun to show its age, and instead of refurbishing it, they looked to the latest and most popular IP at the time. Let's take a look at the Mummy franchise. In 1999, when the first movie came out, it earned $416 million at the box office. And then when the sequel came out in 2001, it bested the original with $433 million. So, Universal knew that they had to have a mummy attraction in the parks. They had already closed Confrontation at Universal Studios Orlando to build Revenge of the Mummy in its place. So in Hollywood, they decided to close E.T. Adventure on March 14th, 2003 to be replaced by Revenge of the Mummy also. Over in Japan, it lasted until May 10th, 2009, when it was decided to be replaced by Space Fantasy. Rumour has it that Steven Spielberg was very upset with these two closures and even threatened to end his contract with Universal if they ever closed the ride at Universal Studios Orlando. Whether this is true or not, the ride still remains at the park and will hopefully stay there for many years to come. Who knows where all those animatronic figures from the retired ride ended up. But it is known that the Botanicus figure is backstage at Universal Studios Hollywood, sadly rotting away in the sun.
E.T. Adventure has 4 out of 5 stars for technology because of the more than 300 animatronics created by Sally Corporation, the light and sound effects, and of course, E.T.'s personalized goodbye. 4 out of 5 stars for the plot because it was a good plot, and the change in the pre-show made it better than it was initially. 5 out of 5 stars for design and execution. The ride had beautiful and well-executed scenes and a fantastic atmosphere. And 3 out of 5 stars for legacy. In this category, it loses some points because, thankfully, this ride is not completely retired, and we can still find it at Universal Studios Orlando. E.T. has an overall score of 16 stars out of 20. On to our next part, brought to you by Theme Park History.
Nickelodeon Studios. Back in the 1980s, Nickelodeon was growing, quickly becoming one of the most popular cable channels. As the popularity of the first cable channel for children grew, its projects started becoming more ambitious, so executives knew they had to take the next step. They needed a place to film all of these projects. This was the perfect moment because at the time, Universal was in the middle of building a brand new park in Orlando, and the two companies were able to make a deal. Universal would provide the sound stages in their new park for Nickelodeon so they could have the production space they needed for their latest projects. This was a great deal for both parties because not only would Nick create their first production studio, but Universal would have one of the most popular family brands in their brand new park. The 90,000 square foot facility was made up of sound stages 18 and 19, with a central building between the two that housed production offices, dressing rooms, makeup rooms, the GAC kitchen, and the Game Lab live show, which was located in Soundstage 17 for guests of the park to visit. The world's first headquarters for kids, Nickelodeon Studios, would officially open with Universal Studios Florida on June 7th, 1990. Even though the channel was already popular when its own facility opened, Nickelodeon was catapulted into stardom with the debut of its first three Nicktoons, Rugrats, Doug, and Ren and Stimpy, in 1991. Nickelodeon Studios became a must-visit destination for any kid who was growing up in the 1990s. It became clear that people all over the world loved Nickelodeon, and now wanted to get a behind-the-scenes look at how shows for the station that were changing the nation were made, and hopefully get slimed as well. The sound stages were painted neon red, blue, and toxic green, paneled with zebra patterns, bolts, stripes, and zigzags. One of its most iconic features, the slime geyser, was located just outside the studios and spewed slime upwards every 15 minutes. Besides being the first production studio at the park, Nickelodeon Studios offered its own attraction, a 40-minute walking tour giving guests an inside look at how Nickelodeon shows were made. The tour took guests through the sets of shows like Kenan and Kel, Clarissa Explains It All, and All That, where they could possibly see actors on set rehearsing or filming new episodes. Guests could even call the official Nick Studios hotline to find out the production schedule for that day. The tour also took guests to the post-production room, where video editing and sound effects were demonstrated being added to their favorite shows. The Nick at Night Museum, where artifacts from Nickelodeon and its late-night classic TV programming block were on display. The GAC Kitchen, where guests were shown how the iconic Nickelodeon GAC was made and even given a chance to taste it. And the most popular stop on the tour, the Game Lab, where guests tested new game show ideas for possible future Nickelodeon shows. Kids from the crowd were selected to participate, and one would even get slimed to wrap up the tour. Guests could also sign up to be in the audience of a live taping of Legends of the Hidden Temple, Figure It Out, Slime Time Live, or Nickelodeon All-Star Challenge. The channel continued to be a massive success throughout most of the 90s, which ironically was the reason for the downfall of Nickelodeon Studios. In 1998, the company opened two brand new studios in California and had begun transitioning from game and stunt shows with audience participation to more traditional sitcoms, many of which required a closed-set production now filmed in Hollywood. A year later, no new shows were shot at Nickelodeon Studios, and the studio tour was shortened from 40 minutes long to only 15, skipping the entire studio portion and heading straight to the GAC Kitchen and Game Lab. The last production ever filmed at the studio, Nickelodeon Splat, was on August 17th, 2004, and just 8 months later, Nickelodeon Studios would officially close on April 30th, 2005. While minimal trace of the studio remains today, if you head to the restrooms underneath the staircase, you can still see the original green slime-themed flooring pattern, which has been there since the park has opened. For 15 years, Nickelodeon Studios was the only place for kids of all ages to get slimed, gacked, and double dared. While it might be no more, there's no denying the impact the world's first kids headquarters had on anyone who took a tour, and it's sad to imagine that this once fantastic place is now gone forever.
Nickelodeon Studios gets 1 out of 5 stars for groundbreaking technology because it was only a studio, and this makes it hard to compete with the other attractions on this list. It gets 2 out of 5 stars for the plot because the tour didn't have a plot per se, but seeing how our favorite shows were made was very interesting. 4 out of 5 stars for design and execution because during that time, studio tours were very popular, and Nickelodeon Studios stood out from all the rest. That slime geyser can't be beaten. And 4 out of 5 for legacy because Nickelodeon was such a massive part of the 90s and early 2000s, and its golden age will always be remembered. That gives Nick Studios 11 out of 20 stars. Let's take a look at our scoreboard so far. We have Battle of Galactica with 10 points, The Funtastic World of Hanna-Barbera with 14 points, E.T. Adventure with 16 points, and Nickelodeon Studios with 11 points. That puts E.T. Adventure in the lead. But we're still missing another 4 attractions presented by more theme park experts, which we'll be ranking next week. So be sure to subscribe and click the bell button so you don't miss the ultimate retired attraction. We would like to thank ReviewTyme, Defunctland, Expedition Theme Park, and Theme Park History for being a part of this video. If for any reason you haven't checked them out, we're leaving a link in the description so you can go watch their amazing content and subscribe to their channels. And let us know, do you agree with our list? Which attraction should get more points? And tell us your predictions for the next video. Thankfully, Universal keeps creating awesome rides and animatronics, and you can check them out. So start planning your next vacation. Our friends at PixieVacations.com will help you plan your perfect vacation to Universal Studios Hollywood, Universal Studios Orlando, or Universal's Islands of Adventure, specifically tailored to your vacation style and budget. And working with a Pixie is completely free. So talk with them to make the best out of your next theme park vacation.